Next, we're grabbing our default value, and now this is where things get a little interesting. Remember that this is a block factory. This is not just one block. In previous versions of Drupal, we could have saved a variable for the settings for a block because we would know that there was only ever going to be one of them. But in this case, there's going to be different settings for each version of this block. So we're going to have to grab this information differently. Let's go ahead and take a look at assignOwnerNode.php and see what it's doing there. So there's a little bit of logic going on here, but you can see several examples of this configuration and then a key of some kind that's used here and here. And if we look at the submission, so we have the configuration form built here, and if we scroll down, we'll see a validate and a submit for that configuration form. And in the submission, we're setting the configuration for this block as this configuration and then that same key. And then in this case, we're doing some logic in order to grab what that value is, but we should be able to set that to whatever. So at this point, I'm going to assume that this is the structure that we're going to use to both save and grab configuration for the block by using this configuration. So if we go back to our block configuration form, let's set this value here to be this, and then configuration, and it's going to be an item in the array. And we'll set this to num to show. And at first, this value won't have a default. So let's set a default using the same method that we used earlier on and use a ternary operator, which in this form is going to be a question mark and a colon. And then we'll set the default value to 5. Okay, we'll cross our fingers on this one. On this next part, options, we're using Drupal map assoc, which we know we can't do. So let's use the same code that we had in our settings form in order to do the same thing. That's going to be array combine here. I'm going to copy this and go over to our Trails history block. And I'll paste this in right next to that code because what we want to do is copy this max to display and paste it in for this 200 here. All right, we'll remove the excess code. Okay, so everything here looks good. Now I'm a little worried about this orange background here, which indicates that this config method isn't found. But let's go ahead and give this a shot and see if our configuration form has changed. So I'm going to jump to our browser, and I'm just going to refresh the block page here and click Trails history. Okay, so nothing seems to happen. I click on it and you see this loading, and then that's it. Now, this might happen sometimes when you're dealing with an overlay. You saw it happen earlier on in this series when our hook cron from our Trails module was causing some errors, and it was preventing that overlay from displaying. So to track this down, this might be a common problem. What you want to do is use the inspector in your browser. So I'm just going to inspect element, and you want to look at the network. Now, every time we click one of these, it's doing an AJAX call to grab some data to actually build out the configuration form. And if we click on this result and we look at the content of it, you should see some kind of error in the content that points you in the right direction. So this says fatal error call to undefined method. And it's that config that we're using on line 64. If we go back to the editor, you can see right here, it was this config I was a little worried about.